I have a quick piece of advice for college graduates, both the really recent, congratulations by the way, that graduated some time ago and the will be graduating in the future. This is a little different than the advice that you're typically going to hear this time of year with commencement speeches focused on looking forward, because I want you to also focus on looking backwards. Never forget that person that you were when you entered college. Remember how confused you were the first time you heard a term or the first time you were introduced to a concept. Remember that, because that's what a lot of people feel a lot of the time, because they haven't had that quality college education that you've had. Going to college is a huge privilege. Education is a huge privilege, and not everybody has that. So if you go and you try to tell your friends or family, maybe people who haven't gone to college, about all this really cool science that you know, they might not be able to understand it because they don't have the background. They don't know the lingo that you're using. And it's not that they're not smart enough to understand it. They just don't have the context. They don't know the terminology. It's like you're speaking another language to them. If you were to go and try to talk to Einstein about genomics, he'd be confused. And obviously it's not because Einstein's stupid, it's just because he doesn't have that background. He doesn't know these terms that you're using. A lot of these weren't even invented when he was alive. So if you want to talk to other people about your science, about what you've learned, which you totally should, you just need to remember that they're going to need a little more background, a little more context. And so if they seem confused, remember that they can understand it. You just have to describe it in simpler terms, or at least explain the terms that you're using. So a lot of times I find that sometimes general SciComm type stuff tends to really water things down. And sometimes this is okay, but sometimes people really want the detail. They just don't know the terminology. We're just using all these words that we can talk to others, say scientists within our field, using all this jargon. And that's not a problem, because they understand it too. And it can even help because it helps get us talk about super duper specific things. But if we're talking to a more general audience, we can still tell them these cool details, maybe not as detailed because they probably don't care about everything, but we can do it just by using simpler terms, or at least explaining the terms that we use. So this is a huge motivation for me. This is why I do what I do. I started the Bumbling Biochemist because I wanted to talk to my friends and family about my work, but I realized that just like Einstein, they were smart, they just didn't have the background that I had to be able to appreciate how cool this biochemistry that I was doing was. This is what motivates me when I try to teach others, and how I'm planning to be teaching when I'm actually a professor. And so basically what I want to do is I'm going to keep that old me in mind. I'm going to keep in mind that college student that I was. Every time, I don't know if it's just a negativity bias of mine, but I have a strong memory of every time that I heard something and I was confused about, and maybe I was embarrassed to ask about, although I typically got over that embarrassment quickly because I really wanted to know the answer. But I want to remember that, and then make sure that every time I explain those terms. So sometimes you might see me explain terms that you might be well, duh, but maybe that was something that I was confused about. And so because I remember those things like assay, which is basically just a word for an experiment, or a residue, which is basically just once you've linked up amino acids to form a protein, those amino acids, they lose their carboxylic acid part, so we can't call them amino acids, so we call the residues, the leftovers, residues. And so things like this, those were things that I was confused about that weren't really explained. What they were kind of just used at first, and I was like, what's that? And then I had to ask. And so now when I explain those concepts, I make sure that I say those things. Similarly, if there was something I did wrong in the lab when I'm the first time I did it, or one of the first times I did it, I make sure that I pass that knowledge on too when I'm teaching people in the lab. So remember the things that you were confused about. Explain those to other people. So whether it's a general audience or whether it's someone who is training in your field and you're teaching them, remember that person that you were starting out, and remember that frame of mind of being confused, of all this stuff. And so you have had this tremendous education these past few years, and that's awesome. And you've changed as a person, and that's awesome. Hopefully you've changed for the better. but you now have this great gift, this knowledge. And I want you to go out there and I want you to share that knowledge with others, whether it be your friends and family, whether it be government officials, whether it be random people in the virtual universe. Share that knowledge, because knowledge really wants to be shared, and not everybody has the privilege of having the education that you've had. But that doesn't mean that they can't still learn. That doesn't mean that they can't appreciate all these cool concepts. And that doesn't mean that you can't help them learn. And so there's all these sorts of different ways to learn. And I think that the world is made stronger if we can really just help one another. And those of us who have the privilege of education, we can fight for other people to get that privilege as well. And we can also help share the knowledge that we get. So I hope that this wasn't just too rambly for you, and I hope that it kind of resonated with you, or at least got you to think about how you should be approaching your future. So yes, this is about looking forward of how you're going to take what you've learned with you and share that knowledge, remembering always that person that you were before. And remembering that you are that person, that you were that person, that you are not superior to that person in any way. You just now know more. And so now you've got this great gift, and the gift of knowledge is so great because it can just be spread and spread and spread and spread. And it's not going to cost you anything more. Just use talk. So I hope this helped, and congratulations to all the recent graduates.